Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. And there are interviews and there are interviews. And I've been looking forward to this interview for a long time. I'm with Phyllis Levitt, who is going to be publishing a book early in 2024 called America in Therapy. And she's this unbelievable mental health practitioner. So Phyllis and I met because of the magic of social media, and what particularly we discovered early on as we've been doing some chatting, that we have this great bond of commonality, and that's one of the things that energizes me, is the commonality. It's very rare, this commonality, Phyllis. Phyllis was born in Plainfield, New Jersey. Grew up there for a time, and that's where my father was born, in Plainfield, New Jersey. And I always got to do my own, this is my book. There's a tortoise in my hair. There's a journey to spirit. It's coming out in a month. Be on Amazon, of course. But there's a whole chunk of Plainfield in there because it's part of me. So we have a lot of stuff to do, Phyllis. It's so important. I subscribe so much to the work you're doing, American Therapy, and the fact that mental health is such an issue today. It doesn't get enough, I don't think, enough care and enough concern and enough awareness, but it's hugely powerful. We've got so this is going to be an amazing, powerful interview, and I'm done with my Johnny Carson, I call it my Johnny Carson monologue. Please, and I'm so grateful you're here, because this is great stuff. And and your book is coming, and so a little background, a little bio, and then we're going to jump into a whole bunch of stuff. Take it away.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for having me. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be talking with you here today, and fun to find our commonality in Plainfield, New Jersey. And that is where I grew up. And where, a lot of the formative experiences in my life happened. In fact, they all happened there, really. And so what I would say is that, I became a therapist in my 30s, after having 3 children and deciding to go back to graduate school. And the reason why I became a therapist is because I had gone to therapy myself, after actually a lot of spiritual pursuits before that. And there was a big realization that happened for me at some point in that process, which was that there was something that needed healing that my spiritual pursuits were not going to heal. And they really had to do with my emotional formation and my emotional well-being. And then that they're obviously, spirituality and psychology are not they're not opposites, they go together. And that's one of my big realizations, is that everything that we pursue, whether it's business or family or relationship, even spirituality, hinges a lot on our mental health and well-being, the way we pursue things and the way we behave in the pursuits that we have. I happen to have some major trauma in my childhood, and I had buried it all, and I didn't remember anything that had happened to me. And so I grew up kind of a mystery to myself, and that's what eventually led me to seek psychotherapy I think it was in the early 80s, where the people that I knew started talking about therapy and going to therapy. And so I gave it a shot. And it was a complete mind blower for me to realize I had no conception that my early conditioning would have anything to do with who I had become. It just wasn't on my radar to think that way. And no one talked that way when I grew up. And so I attributed all the things that I considered failings or lacks in myself to be just flaws in my own being, which is a terrible way to live. It's a terrible way to think about yourself. And it's very painful, and it's very injurious, because it's not the truth. We are all magnificent human beings in our essence. And a lot of our conditioning can cover that over and make it inaccessible, but it's not that it's not there. And so the world of psychology really opened up my life for me. And I went on a very deep journey for a very long time. And it was not a fun journey in a lot of ways, because it opened up a lot of pain. And I want to say this because it's so important to understand that there's light on the other side. If you make that journey with a competent person in a safe setting, there's light on the other side that is so worth the journey. And I can't say that loudly enough, because that's the journey I believe America needs to make, which is that really deep, introspective look at our history, our behaviors, our strengths, and our failings, our weaknesses, or our our missteps. Let's say it that way, because I really do want to take blame out of the situation and out of the conversation and bring in deep understanding. So that's how my journey with psychology began. I became a therapist at the time that I was doing a lot of inner work myself. And I worked for a couple of years in a sexual abuse treatment program, which was a fabulous foundation for the work that I did, because I got a real bird's eye view into dysfunctional family dynamics, abuse family dynamics, and the after effects, and what treatment and help can provide in terms of bringing that light into the darkness of what we're capable of as human beings, unfortunately, and what we've been conditioned to many times repeat and reenact with one another. So that's sort of how I got where I was. And then, just to make some quick segues here, so you kind of have a picture, and then we can dive in together, Calvin, however you want to. I had felt very alone most of my life. And even though I was married and had 3 children at that time, I still felt extremely alone. And I had not made a good marriage based on a lot of unhealed wounds that I was repeating in the relationship that I had. But I had a big aha that I actually wasn't alone at all, that there are millions of people who have unhealed trauma all over the world, from dysfunctional family dynamics and abuse family dynamics to being the subject of discrimination and unjust poverty or injustice, or at the after effects of war. People are suffering major trauma all over the world with no access to any help and no access to understand themselves, why they react the way they do, why they, in many cases, can't make better choices or fulfill their dreams or have meaningful relationships or safe relationships, that I wasn't alone at all. And that post-traumatic stress on a very large spectrum is rampant in America and all over the world. And it's not just from returning vets, which is sort of one of the ways that we see it. And of course, there are many vets that have post-traumatic stress from being in extremely dire and threatening and, life-threatening circumstances, for sure. But there are many people suffering from all kinds of post-traumatic stress from just the inhumanity that we perpetrate on one another. From that. And sometimes those scars are very hard to see, but they're real, and the effects of them are real. So that was my first big aha. And my second big aha, which led to writing the book that I just wrote, America in Therapy, was that having such an intimate view of what the dynamics of an abusive family are and a dysfunctional family are, it was like not the biggest leap to realize that many of our largest institutions and our government itself are operating on abuse family dynamics and dysfunctional family dynamics, having terrible effects on millions of people, who then, many of whom have no recourse to help, because the power of those in charge who make policy that is discriminatory or violent or neglectful cannot be challenged. And so I felt that I had to write this book, America in Therapy, for 2 reasons. One, to really share what I have learned about abuse family dynamics so that we can understand what's happening to us as a country. And I'm not saying that's all that's happening in our country, but it is significant what's happening in our country. And there are many, many good things happening in our country. And there are many fabulous, wonderful people doing amazing things in our country. But we don't go to the doctor for the things that are working. We go, we go for where there's ailment. We go for where there's injury and disease. And so half of my book, in a way, is really devoted to outlining what I understand is happening in the family of America through the lens of individual family dynamics. And the other half is devoted to what we have learned in the field of psychology that can interrupt this cycle. What helps? Where is there hope? How can we break the cycle of abuse and discrimination and poverty and gender violence and racial violence and injustice? How can we break this cycle in the family of America using some of the tools and the knowledge and the understanding that we've gained in our individual offices with individuals and families and children and couples? And that's how America in Therapy came to be born.
Wow. Wow, we're gonna dissect some stuff shortly. Before that, I know before American Therapy, you wrote two previous books. If you can just briefly talk
Sure.
about it. I don't know. Oh, okay. A Light in the Darkness. People can see. If talk about A Light in the Darkness, and then right after that, you wrote Into the Fire. So if you can give us a little bit of insight into both those books.
Yeah. And let me just say, I always knew I wanted to be a writer ever since I was a little girl. I don't know how we know some of those things, but we just do. And I did know that I wanted to be a writer. And I always wrote. I wrote poetry when I was young. I kept stacks of journals. And it was always, I think the motivation was always to find some way to connect to my deepest essential self. That was really what writing meant to me. And the first two books that I wrote that you mentioned, A Light in the Darkness and Into the Fire, are much more autobiographical than the book that I presently wrote, America in Therapy. And they really just chronicle just some of the darkness that I was moving through, and then some of the light that I found. Which was really a very profound connection to my inner voice, my inner spirit, my inner guide. And actually, though those books are written in a very different style and with very different content than America in Therapy, it was really that finding of my essential self that enabled me to write this third book. Because I really do believe that when we connect to our essence, beneath the conditioning, beneath the hurt, beneath, some of the faulty beliefs that we've taken on because we're human and because nobody does it perfectly, that beneath that is really a connection to love and a connection to our humanity and to other human beings. And so out of that came my desire to share what I've learned about more healthy human relationships through the lens of psychology. So that's the short version.
Okay, so now, of course, I've studied up on you, and I have my notes in America in Therapy. So I want to be a little graphic in my own terms, and talking about America in Therapy. And these are some of my notes that I'll share with you, and you can address
Sure.
to accentuate the power of American Therapy, why people need to read this. Not because I'm sitting here talking to you, but people need to read this and understand. And I think that's a big part of the problem. Maybe, and I ain't no expert. The realization, the understanding, the coming to terms with we need help, and why do we need help? So these are some of the notes I wrote in preparation. And people can think about this. We've got mass murder like never before. We've got shootings, we've got hatred, we got polarization. I live across the river from New York City. We got murders, we got children being shot, we got drugs in daycare, people getting run over, people getting pushed into subways, hitting children and a mother with a hammer, the war in Ukraine, Putin threatening a nuclear war almost every day, climate change. We've got 15,000 people or 12,000 people dead in Libya. That's the desert by flood. Is this biblical? We've got heat, we've got rain, we've got drought, we've got storms, we've got COVID, we've got migrants, we've got desperation. We need therapy. Address that.
That's a beautiful way and a way to introduce it, because what I want to say about all my experience personally and professionally is what the main motivation that brings people to get help is pain. Something is not working in a big way in their lives that makes them open enough to seek help from another human being. So pain actually can be our friend if it's a motivator to find help and to be open to doing things differently or discovering something new in our lives. Unfortunately, however, with the things that you're mentioning, too many people are suffering pain with no access to help. So it's not a motivator. It's actually drives more and more pain and more dysfunction. And that's one of the things that we need to really look at in this country when we have so many people suffering poverty and so many people without access to medical care, or who are treated so unkindly and cruelly in the justice system. And the list goes on, then we have to know that we are going to have a highly symptomatic population. People who are in pain from misdeeds and cruelty and injustice from other human beings they become symptomatic. And we have to understand what their symptoms are. But let me backtrack for a minute, because something that I really want to say that I don't think the average person understands is that the root cause of mental health issues, of mental illness and ill mental health and dysfunctional behavior, the root cause is hurt from other people. It's that simple. It's a lack of love. It's a lack of feeling that we belong, that we're needed and wanted, that we're valued and not only tolerated, but celebrated for our differences, that we have safety around us and our basic needs are provided for. And a big one, and I've probably left a few things off the list that are really important for our mental health and well-being, but a really, really big one that we don't always factor into the conversation is that we need role models and examples, and we need to be surrounded with people who know how to and are committed to settling conflict without violence. We still live in a win-lose paradigm in this country, and I think all over the world. And yes, there are many people now who are talking about mediation and about deep listening and working things out and advocating for peace and peaceful conflict resolution. But it's not a broad enough conversation yet in America to have changed the way politics are being handled in our country. And it needs to be. And so when people are hurt by the lack of the things that I'm talking about, a lack of love, a lack of belonging, a lack of peaceful conflict resolution around them, which means there's an invitation to violence, there's an invitation to dominating one another to get our needs met, rather than actually working something out so that everyone's needs get met, at least partially, which is what good conflict resolution is about. Or we agree to separate without doing harm to one another. So I just want to re-emphasize that point, that what causes mental illness is harm from other people that goes unaddressed, that isn't stopped and isn't treated. And that means at its heart that our families are suffering. And our children aren't learning this enough in their own families because their parents haven't learned it, and or because the stressors coming from the larger world around them are so enormous that they're out of control in terms of how they're behaving in their own families, because they can't handle the stress that they're living under. And of course, there's a lot more to be said about each thing that I'm saying, but I'm trying to make that point that if we want to talk about mental health, we're not talking about the person who's hearing voices on the side of the street. That person certainly has a mental health issue, but that's not all there is to mental health. Mental health is about redefining and reworking our relationship to one another. So please pick it up from there. I might have lost one of your threads, but
yeah, by the way, I don't know if you saw me writing. I was taking notes. I'm an interviewer and I'm taking notes. I'm writing things down. You know, the root cause is heard from others. Wow. Wow. I gotta take a deep breath. I'm taking a deep breath. I'm gonna go off topic and ask one of my favorite questions just to reduce the heaviness, but it's a cute question. Here's one of several that I want to ask you, completely off topic, just to catch my breath. And you don't even have to answer it. It's cute. I told you where I borrowed it from before I went on air. So be it. You know, a good journalist, I guess, has different sources. So, anyway, Phyllis, excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
Excluding family or friends, someone I would like to spend the day with?
Yeah, living or dead you'd like to spend a day with.
Oh,
Cute question.
well,
It could be a few. There's no rules here.
yeah, I would love to spend the day with Jesus, honestly. I'd like to know the real man.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yep, me too. I would have answered that. Me too. I read about some of my journeys. That great answer. All right. Back to work. By the way, the back to work. For me, just a layperson and just a regular guy, I go to Rutgers football, basketball games, a regular guy. When I composed that little thing about the things that I observe and see in the mental health aspect, by the way, I get totally overwhelmed with everything I see, with everything. And, again, I'm across the river from New York and I'm seeing, and it's almost comedic. You can almost get George Carlin to come back and do a comedy routine on the things that are happening in New York, and they're all byproducts of mental health, that whole umbrella thing. And I got a picture of my grandkids back there. I love my grandkids. And I don't think a day goes by, Phyllis, when not a day goes by when me and just a regular guy here don't really worry about their world.
Yeah.
The fear that I have for children and the future.
That's actually one of the many reasons I wrote this book, because I have children and grandchildren too. And I do fear for the future of the world that they will inherit. And I believe it's our responsibility to make that world safe and to make that world kind and to make that world safe for all human beings and to welcome every child, no matter what their race or color or gender is. And we have a long way to go. I think we all love our children. That's one of the things that I think is a sign of how disturbed our mental health has become and has been for a long time as human beings, because we condone and perpetrate on other human beings that we would be horrified if they were perpetrated on us. And that gap between what we want for ourselves and what we allow to be done for others, to others, is a sign of mental unwellness. So that's one of the big issues. And I think that one of the ways that I talk about America in Therapy is that we are being kind of still conditioned to believe that the divisiveness and the hatred and the acting out that comes from positions of power and leaders in government or government institutions or other institutions that wield a lot of power, we're being conditioned still to believe that this is based on ideological differences and that might equals right, that whoever has power has a right to impose their view of the world on anyone and everyone. And it's not an ideological issue. not at its heart, it's a mental health issue, because mentally healthy people do not do that to one another. Mentally healthy people really try to work things out with other human beings to the very best of their ability, without hatred, without violence, without humiliation. And if push comes to shove, separate peacefully. But the bottom line for us, and I think we have to know this, is there is no peaceful separation from the earth. We're here. If we're not committed to working it out with our neighbors, there's no place to go. And I think we need to know that that's really the challenge here. How do we settle our differences, not just internally in our country, but around the world, without resorting to what we now have as weapons of mass destruction, which could eliminate all of us?
Correct. Correct.
If that isn't a sign that something has to change in our mental and emotional health and well-being, that we're still investing billions of dollars in better ways to kill more people, I'm not sure what is.
I in the early days of the war in Ukraine, and I interviewed a professor who goes back and forth, and she's written books about the children and the women of Ukraine, and I've seen pictures when I was preparing to interview her, and I actually get sick to my stomach, because we're taking a whole country and all those millions of people and those precious, wonderful children,
Right.
and we're subjecting them to what. So I look, and and by the way, I look at the head of Russia. I won't mention names. And I also look back to the rise and fall of the Third Reich, and that kind of mental health stuff, and then I also, I'm going off a little bit here, but I also look back to Dickens when he wrote A Christmas Carol in 1843, and I think about that too, because I always watch that movie, Christmas Eve, the one with Alastair Sim. Oh, do I love that movie? And the powerful scene, and this is a little bit of a segue to you and your work, is Scrooge is confronted with three ghosts, and one is the ghost of Christmas Present. And at the very end of his time with the ghost of Christmas Present, this is the brilliance of Dickens. The spirit opens up his coat, and there's two worn and tattered children under his coat, and Scrooge asks, well, "Who are they?" And the spirit says, "It's man's. These are man's. They belong to man." And the little boy, there's a little boy and a little girl. The little boy represents ignorance, and the little girl represents want. And the spirit says, "Beware, but mostly beware of the little boy, the ignorance." And I say to myself, well, my God, nothing has changed since 1843, when Dickens wrote that. So what we have today is ignorance. So we have ignorance that is rampant over the whole world. We have ignorance that lets a man lets Hitler ignorance, and let everything that happened. 50 million people died. And now we have the same kind of ignorance that lets this go on. And so how can we ever break that cycle?
Yeah, and I would say that one of the main reasons why I wrote my book is to help educate people about the world of psychology that I think the average person really doesn't know, but not because they're stupid, but because we don't share that information. I mean, I think ignorance, I would say, the word sounds a little bit negative, but really it's a lack of being informed. It's not, there's no blame attached to it. so I think our job is to help educate each other with the best of what we've learned that can save us, that can help us, that can help relieve suffering. So one of the things I want to share with you about that is, this is one of the things that I learned as a psychotherapist that I would have had no idea about before I studied family therapy and actually worked with families. And that is, so in the beginning of my practice, I worked primarily with children. So the clients that were referred to me were children. The vast majority of the children that I saw were suffering in a conflictual divorce situation, or where their families were still intact, but the parents were in high conflict with one another. And for a variety of reasons, stressed out, bad childhoods themselves, whatever it was. But it was the child that was brought to therapy. Child was brought to therapy for bedwetting, for becoming really aggressive with siblings or kids at school, for having difficulty learning or learning to read, for excessive fears, for isolation and withdrawal, or for having, like tics, or, having some kind of anxiety symptom. It was the child often that came to therapy. And what we know now in the whole area of family therapy is that it's often the most symptomatic person that will get the whole family system to help. And so we'd call the kid, or whoever it was, the most symptomatic person in the family, but it was often a child. We call them the identified patient. They look like the one with the worst problem, but actually they're expressing the pain of the family. And I had numerous children like that. There was nothing wrong with these children, whether they were, having terrible fears of the dark, or they were hitting their siblings, or they couldn't learn to read. There was nothing wrong with them. They were suffering from the dysfunction around them, and
Wow.
they were becoming highly symptomatic. And so we would call their symptoms, in the world of psychology and family therapy, we'd call them, their symptoms, the cry for help for the family. So we have to know, and I think many people do not know, that the mass murderers, that the extortionists, that the rapists, that the people who are committing racially violent crimes or crimes against women, they are also calling for help for the family of America. They are the most symptomatic among us because of the dysfunction often in their families of origin, and or in the family of America around them, that is discriminating against them, or withholding the necessities of life from them, or putting them in jail, for crimes they didn't commit, with exorbitant sentences, and then using them as the labor for an industry. We could go on and on about the injustices that are happening in this country. And we have to know that the most symptomatic among us are crying for help for that dysfunction in the larger families that we have created here in America. And so Therapy for America means healing the family of America, as well as giving help to the individual families to change these abusive and neglectful dynamics that so many people are suffering from.
Slightly off topic. Social media doesn't help, does it?
Yeah, it's not off topic, actually,
Okay.
because it is a problem. I mean, and again, I want to say human beings are a very extraordinary creature, I believe. We have amazing brain power and intelligence that we have cultivated and expanded, and we're capable of so much creativity and invention with technology, with architecture, with art, with science, with medicine. And we're also capable of amazing love and generosity and kindness and helpfulness and self-sacrifice. We're capable of incredible things. So I don't want to discount that or minimize it, but equally we are capable of we're capable of Auschwitz, we're capable of ethnic cleansing, we're capable of genocide, we're capable of building nuclear weapons. And I think as a race of beings, not just Americans, but certainly Americans, we need to come to terms with both of our capacities and really look at what survival means for us, because it means that we have to rein in our most aggressive impulses and our most exploitive impulses and our most hateful impulses if we all want to survive.
Phew. Heavy stuff. Um,
Oh, so let me just say about social media.
yes.
So the thing about social media is it's a fantastic tool for spreading information and informing people, but it's subject to both of those impulses, to do good and to propagate impulses that are very harmful to other people. And I think as a society, we have to become responsible for that, not in the terms of censorship, but in terms of actually really wanting to promote in the world through social media and any other means of dissemination of information, the things that are going to help us survive. And one of the things that's really, really difficult about the social media today, and we all know this, I'm stating the obvious here, is that when you have people in positions of power who get a lot of attention on social media, who are role modeling terrible dynamics of harm and hate and violence toward other people, and that's the role model that our young people see and our adults see being sort of celebrated or becoming fascinating on social media, then that's an influence coming from the family of America onto all of us. And we can take responsibility for that. We can say we don't want this on our social media. We want role models of peace and justice and healthy conflict resolution. We're going to have conflict. Healthy mental health doesn't mean that you're going to have no more conflict, that we're all just going to be walking around in perfect agreement. I don't believe that's ever going to happen for human beings. Mental health is not about constant agreement or conformity or anything like that. It's about working things out in a way that respects the rights and the opinions and the voice and the needs of all the people involved. And that is much harder to accomplish than waging any kind of war. War is actually easy. Peace is not.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. I love that. I got to remember that. I'm writing that down. War is easy.
Because we know this in our relationships, right? It's easy to have a fight with somebody. You just get triggered. You feel right about your position. You feel insistent that the other person hear you. We all do this. We've all done it. That's the easy part. We're on automatic pilot, just fighting for our cause, right? To actually sit down and rein ourselves in and make room for the other person to have a differing opinion and listen deeply to where they're coming from, the way that we actually want them to hear us, that is really hard work. But I will say this, and for anybody who has done even a little bit of this in their relationships, whether it's with a partner or their children or people at work or friends or whoever, you know that the rewards of actually doing that with the people in your life are invaluable. You can't even put a price tag on it because you're back into love and connection. And that's what we all want. And it's those broken bonds of love and connection that create all the ill mental health and behaviors that we're suffering from.
Take these deep breaths because just listening. So some of our problems in my notes that our world is filled here in America from top to bottom with stuff that we look at institutions like fossil fuel companies who deny climate change. We look at people running for the highest office, no names mentioned, who's been indicted 4 times. These are just generic statements. So this also the question I'm asking, what we're seeing, these little elements, this also contributes to the state of American therapy, America's mental health. No matter how you fractionate it and how you shake it and stir it, and these are things that we see, are revered companies, are cigarette companies, have denied for decades and decades that cigarettes cause cancer. So this is also part of a world which, right, Phyllis, contributes to our problems.
Absolutely. And there's a whole chapter or more than one, I don't remember, in my book where I talk specifically about the dynamics of abusive and neglectful families or dysfunctional families. And one of them is a big one that you're talking about that we're really living with a lot of in America today is denial of what's actually happening. It's just denied. An abuser in a family does not admit that they're hurting other people. What they do is blame their victims. I beat you because you didn't do your homework, because I molested you because you wore that short skirt and you wanted it. I kicked you out of the house because you didn't blah, blah, whatever. You talked back to me. Abusers blame their victims, and that's what we do a lot in this country, rather than take responsibility for the actions that we're actually perpetrating. And so in order to keep that system going, you can't misuse other people for your own purposes, whether it's to vent your rage or to feel all powerful or to act out sexually or to exploit people through greed. You can't do that unless you have power over them. And one of the ways that abusive people and institutions keep power over others is to deny what they've actually done or minimize it. And one of the ways that denial takes place is blaming the victim, but it's not the only way. Sometimes it's just outright denial. I didn't hit you that hard. You asked for it. Whatever it is. And sometimes it's more insidious than that. It's that you're not allowed to talk about certain things. You can't say, if you say what happened, you will be hurt worse. You might even be killed. And that certainly is happening in America today. And that's, one of the reasons why we need journalists, and it's why we need all the voices. We need to be listening to all the voices if we're going to heal what's aching and hurting and lethal in the family of America. And I like to give a medical model, because if you have someone suffering from, something that looks like it could kill them, let's just say, you want to bring in all the doctors and get all the opinions about what could be causing this and what would be the best treatment. And I would love to see that model be applied to our mental health and well-being, that we bring in all the voices, bring in the people who know about the economy, bring in the people who know about climate change, bring in the people who know about the problems in our medical system, bring in the people who know about the disparities in education and wages, and put them all at the table so that we can actually solve our problems with the best knowledge that we all have. I have a psychological piece. I don't have every piece, and I don't imagine that I do. I'd love to be in conversation with all those other people and experts in their fields.
Ooh, watch this off topic. I gotta catch my breath here. Yeah, completely random and off topic, but Phyllis, tell me some of your favorite movies and
Well, can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what makes you feel like you have to catch your breath and change the subject?
Well, because
Yeah.
because I'm digesting everything you're saying. I subscribe to everything you're saying. And I do want to catch my breath because it overwhelms me. I mean, all
Okay.
of this overwhelms me, and I've
Okay.
mentioned that to you a few times. Yeah, by the way, I wrote an essay. I don't know if this is pertinent. I wrote an essay a bunch of years ago. And here's the essay. It's sort of, we were talking about like fossil fuel companies and stuff, denial, and so I wrote an essay a few years ago, and I shared it. But anyway, I didn't have a problem with Don Corleone personally. And actually, I liked him. Why I like Don Corleone is because he was taking care of his family, and that's very important to take care of family. Yeah, a couple people got killed here or there, but part of my essay was if you really want to go after people who do the killing, go after some companies who put products on the market that they know ain't going to work, and there's going to be bad side effects and bad accidents, and a couple of hundred people are going to die, and that's okay because keeping the product on the market for an extra year, the extra revenue will pay for the 100 or 200 lawsuits. So those, to me, were more criminal than Don Corleone. Is that a mental health thing that I just described to you?
Well, I think they're all mental health issues. They're just on a different scale. But I think one of the main qualities of an abuser or someone who misuses power over other people is that they have lost connection to the impact they're having on the people they hurt. They have lost the ability to feel empathy for the pain they have inflicted. And they have lost the ability to reflect on how would that be if that happened to me. Which I was referring to earlier. So I think it's just on different scales. But the person who murders one person and the person who murders 50 people or 10,000 people or 50 million people has lost connection to their basic humanity. And that's the real danger of our declining mental health, is that we lose connection to our basic humanity and we can no longer feel the impact of the pain that we inflict, which only opens the door to being more exploitive and more violent and more destructive. Because if I don't feel any consequence, then what's to stop me from getting more of what I think I want from dominating other people? I think we have to really, and this is a big deal. There are certain elements that are really helpful when you're working with people, that help people resolve issues and learn to listen to each other. And we can talk about some of those because I talk about them in my book and how it would be to apply them to the functioning of our large institutions in our country. But for the moment, I just want to say that I think what we're really looking at is that we have to rework our relationship to power. I don't think it's within the scope of good mental health for one person to have power over millions.
Yeah.
Because it closes the door to listening to the wants and needs and legitimate differences of other people. And that's what we're suffering from so much here in America, that the conversation is narrowed down to right and wrong, and a grab for power and more power and more power that silences the voices of dissent. And when you silence the voices of dissent, just like you do in an abusive family where someone's being hurt and they can't tell, and they're punished for telling or crying or speaking out or trying to get help, then there's nothing to stop the abuse from going on and continuing and accelerating.
Two more questions. One, favorite movies.
Yeah, I have my favorite movie of all time was the first Avatar. That was my favorite movie.
Wow. Okay. Last question. What can I do?
Yeah. And that's really the question, because what I try, I mean, it's easy in a way to just talk about what's wrong. And we need to talk about what's wrong. Just like when you go to the doctor, you have to tell them every bit of your ache and pain and what you're experiencing, or they can't really help as well if they don't have that information. But then once we talk about what isn't working, then we do want to talk about what does work. And so, first of all, just to answer your question and then maybe to segue a little bit, what we can all do is heal ourselves. We can all do our own work. If there's a relationship you have that's not working, get help to resolve it or separate peacefully. Talk to your kids, role model the kinds of behaviors that you want them to be doing in the world. And none of us are going to do it perfectly. I don't know anybody who does. We all have our triggers. We all have our moments, but a commitment to be a better human being in relationship to the people around us, to be more loving, to be more patient, to be more kind, to be more generous, to really try to resolve conflict without attack. If I or you are doing that in your own life, again, imperfectly, but to the best of your ability, you don't know the ripple effect that's going to have on the people around you, but they will experience something that we all need, which is love and kindness. So the more we give that to each other, the more we create the world that we want to have around us. And it costs nothing. That's the thing. It's completely free. It doesn't cost us anything, and it's invaluable to say a kind word to a hurting person, to put your arm around them, to ask somebody, to let them know, I'm really here for you. Tell me what's bothering you. I really want to know. To care. It costs nothing, and yet it will change the world. So we
Yeah.
can all be the agents of change. And it's not Pollyanna thinking, it's real. It's real. How many stories have you, read in the human interest articles, that pop up here and there about somebody who was about to commit suicide, and somebody showed up right at that moment with kindness and care and deep listening, and they didn't jump or they didn't shoot themselves. And then we think of the people that had nobody like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what we can all be the agents of change, especially if we know that it can really happen from that level, from the individual level up.
Wow. You can, you just said some things. It's funny, one of my favorite folk singers was Phil Oakes. And he sang some great stuff coming out of the 60s, especially anti-war stuff, Vietnam War stuff. And when the world changed for him, and his music wasn't needed because of the end of the war in Vietnam and stuff, he committed suicide. And I dwell on that. I dwell on that, and I say to myself, if I was only there, close by, I could have told him how much his music meant to me, something kind, which is what you just said, Phyllis. Something kind, something nice. You're needed. I loved your music. I loved you. Uh,
Yeah.
and no, I'm not upset at myself because I wasn't there, because the reality is I wasn't there, and there was no way I could have been there. But I say to myself, it's a precious life, and all he might have needed was just. But anyway, it's what you just said.
We all have people that we can be there for. And that's the beauty, whether it's your immediate family or your friend circle or the people you work with, or a random person who you meet in a store who's waiting on you, a waitress, a clerk in the store. We have endless opportunities to smile, to light up somebody's day with, kind words, or just, how are you? I've told this story a couple of times. I don't remember where I read this article. I wish I could quote it, but I read an article by a woman who had decided that she wanted to hear people's stories because she really felt like that was a missing in America, that people want to tell their stories. And so she decided to drive across the United States, and in each state, she was going to stop and ask different people to tell their stories.
Wow.
And she said that she drove through 3 states before she had the courage to stop. She was terrified of doing this. She finally stopped at a diner, and she told herself, the first person that makes eye contact with me, I'm going to go sit down with and tell them what I'm up to and ask them if they'd tell their story. So she goes into the diner. A man at the far end of the diner, sitting alone at a table, looked up at her. She walked over and she told him what she was about, and she asked him to tell his story. And he said to her, no one has ever asked me. And this is human connection. We want to be known. We want to connect with other people, and we connect through who we are and our stories and what our life experiences are. And that's some of the poverty in America, and I think around the world today, is that we're so busy trying to survive, honestly trying to survive, that we don't often have time for the basic human need of connecting. Anybody can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been great. And you know what? I got 2 pages of notes I took from you already. And I'm supposed to be asking you the questions, but I'm taking notes. So this is great. I I cannot thank you enough for your graciousness and your passion and your energy and your words. The book's coming out, American Authority is coming out in 2024, so I'm officially inviting you to come back when it's out.
Great.
We'll go through this again. We can't go through this enough times. And I'm just so glad that we met, because I'm learning from you, and to hear this stuff, and you know, I'll reread my notes. So anyway, to remind people, phyllislevitt.com, people, you know, phyllislevitt.com, all of that stuff is going to be, you know, for people to see every couple of minutes, you know, Light in the Darkness, and Into the Fire at phyllislevitt.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'd love to come back because, you know, even this is the tip of the iceberg, because we have learned so much in the field of psychology and human relations that I know could benefit all of us and our country. And that's really what I'm about. This is about how can I help, which I think so many people are asking. What can I do? How can I help?
Yeah. Okay, and it's funny, that's part of the impetus for me to have done this channel.
Mhm.
When I created this channel 3 years ago, I said, you know, everybody's going to interview Oprah and everybody's going to interview George Clooney, but there's so many wonderful, amazing people out there who
Yeah.
have stories like yourself, amazing stories, accomplishments, books, things that they've done all over the world. Because you know, I interview people all over the world, and so if I can, in one small way, give people a platform, and I can grow that platform and have a little bit more resonance out there in the world, and then I'm doing a good deed.
And you are. And I really want to emphasize that because I think the whole world of podcasting is really filling a great need for sort of an unfiltered venue for people to have a voice, share their stories, share their expertise, share what they have to offer, that sort of circumvents the filters of social media and the news channels. So I think it's fabulous what you're doing, and this is a wonderful platform. So thank you again for having me.
Thank you.